So you want to come out of the SNU. In one sense it's very, very easy, and in the other sense it's very, very difficult, and depends on a number of very, very important things. Ultimately it's your will and your strength and your bravery to come out of the SNU. Your determination to do so is what will see you through and will get you out of the SNU. Now, there are two things worth mentioning. One is that if you don't want to be in the SNU, then you do not have to be, no matter what your status is. But also, as well as not wanting to be in the SNU, and that automatically in one sense meaning that you're not in it, there are a number of requirements and certain, shall we say, legal or legalities that we need to look at. The first thing you must remember, and remember throughout all this, is that I am not an absolute expert. I'm simply experienced as a president, and I'm experienced going back some 30 plus years. And I've followed it all and been through it all, and I've gone all the way to the High Court with the SNU. Well, they took me all the way to the High Court. I've had the Charity Commission join me as second defendant against the SNU. Now the SNU won, but we'll get to that, why they won. Knowing what I know now, they need not have won. We could have won. And the result was that they sold our premises for around £300,000. Bearing in mind they didn't pay for it, they were not the owners of it. We bought it, we paid for it, we own the land, the property and the assets outright. Now this is the important thing that you must remember, is that you, whether you're an affiliation or associated body status, whether you own your property or you rent it, what we'll call the church, right, must have existed in its own right as an unincorporated body in order for it to qualify for membership of the SNU in the first place. You've got to think about that. So the SNU will try and argue that you are incorporated into the body, that you are the SNU. Well, that's not right. That's wrong. They tried to argue and they lost that in the Waterloo case, which is SNU versus West. You are the true purchasers and owners of your land, property and assets, and all the things that are to do with your church or spiritual centre, right? At all times they belong rightfully and in law to the members, the fully paid up members. And even as the SNU rules for church acquiesce, that the power of the church is vested in the members, in the full members, in general meeting. Never forget that. The SNU are not members of your committee. The SNU is not a member of your church, and neither is the SNU Trust, and neither are the District Council. You got to think about that. You are the true purchasers and owners of the land, property and assets, and it is up to you to do with those things whatever you wish to do. You can close the church, you can sell it off, provided the members agree. It's entirely up to you what you do with it. The SNU has no power whatsoever. So how does it wield so much power? Well, the bottom line, of course, is that it's run by crooks and thieves. It's a crooked organisation, it's corrupt from the core, and it's out there to steal your land, property and assets because it sees them as being its cash cows. And like all parasites, it doesn't completely drain the host. So if you come up against the SNU, if you try to say anything against them that they disapprove of, you will notice that all the bylaws and all the things that they invoke begin with, many of them under bylaws C13 and C16 for instance, begin with if in the opinion of the NEC, National Executive Committee. Now you've got to think about that to catch all, isn't it? If, comma, in the opinion of, comma, the National Executive Committee. And then it's, you know, it's all laid out then in a catch-all, what was called in the trial, swinging, punitive rules. Now that's not what our forefathers set up the movement to be about. It's not what the spirit world wants it to be about, and it's not what you want it to be about. It's what no one wants it to be about other than the SNU and those people, misguided and, you know, souls as they are, who see it as the be all and end all. And often you'll get people say, well, we know the union isn't perfect, but it's all we've got. We know the system doesn't work, but it's all we've got. And all we can do is try and work together to try and make it better. Right, if you follow all that, then switch off this now. Right, I'm talking to the Robin Hoods, I'm talking to the Freemen, I'm talking to the people who are sovereign individuals and recognise that you are the power, that you are the control. Now, committees are elected by the membership to serve them in whatever manner they direct. You're elected as officers and etc. to simply run the day-to-day business of the church, and any big decisions or anything like that are handled in with special resolutions and so forth. So bearing in mind that you actually own the place outright, if, for argument's sake, you're one of those who have your deeds in trust with the SNU, that's where the gubbins of what this talk is all about. I'm not a legal expert, there are flaws in what I say, but essentially if you follow it through, I don't see any reason why you can't remove yourself from that organisation. Now then, please make this video wide known to, you know, promulgate to anyone who's interested and anyone who wants to regain control of their church. Right, so having said that you are the owner, the true owner, the purchaser of the property, the land and the assets and everything else, the bank account, the whole ball of wax, right? The thing about the Waterloo trial was that the judge wanted to know who the true owners were, and the SNU kept standing up and saying that they were the true owners. So the union, they were asked how did they pay for the church, and they said, well, we didn't pay for it. So the judge said, who paid for it? They said, the members of Waterloo Spiritualist Church. He said, how did they pay for it? And they said, through subscriptions and donations. And he says, well, how come, and with some anger, and in fact a great deal of anger, how come you are saying that you own this building? How come you are saying you own the land and the assets? How come you are claiming ownership and exclusive possession of this building if you haven't paid for it? The building belongs to the true purchasers. Now the judge is making an interesting thing, that you know, statement here that you mustn't forget. It's a bit like, let's say for argument's sake that the car that I drive, I didn't buy it, but if I register myself as the keeper, even if I take out tax and insurance and I pay the MOT, the running costs and all the petrol, right, I'm still only the keeper of the vehicle. In law, it's who the true purchaser of the vehicle is. So it doesn't matter whose name's on it, right? It's who actually bought it. Now the SNU is not allowed to set up churches. That's not part of what it was about. It's simply a union of churches. It's not a union on the trade union model. It's not that type of model. It's a union of churches. It's a strange model, but it still follows essentially Companies Table A of the Companies Act and so forth. Now what you do is they have removed, because of the Waterloo case 10 years ago, or more or less 10 years ago, a decade or so ago, in 2002, right, because of that case, which went from the year 2000 to 2002, it was heard in the magistrates court to start with, and they tried to get an interim injunction against me personally acting as president of the church, because they saw an article that I wrote on the internet where we were going to disaffiliate, or suggested to the membership that it's up to them whether or not they disaffiliate, to be or not to be, it was called, that the union cited that as detrimental to the image of spiritualism and against the SNU in the furtherance of its objects and goals and so forth. right? And basically those things were laughed at in court, because in a court of law that had no substance, because it didn't show spiritualism in any way blackened or darkened, or casting aspersions on spiritualism, and neither did it was it detrimental to the image of the union and the furtherance of its objects and so forth. So but you see, the SNU had an emergency meeting of its NEC and it was the second time ever in its history, in its 100-year history, that it ever done this, where they they conspired using Post, that's the Royal Mail, to pass legislation where they could have a meeting where they all don't have to meet up, and they immediately passed legislation, or passed a resolution removing me as president of the church. Now, in all honesty, it's only the members of your church who can remove officers of the committee. But if you acquiesce to it, if your members say, okay, we accept the SNU, then that's fine, switch off the video now. But if, on the other hand, you and your committee and your members completely disagree with what the SNU is saying, then that is your right to stand up to them and reverse any of their legislation, or not so much reverse it, but resist it, because you can't reverse it, because they'll never reverse it. But you simply ignore it, or you write back to them and say, this is our church, we own it outright, it belongs to us, the assets, the land, the property and everything else, the control, as I've said before, all the things I've said, control, the power of the church being vested in the members, and there's nothing they can do. And then what they'll do, they'll pass further legislation by degrees of removing officers and committee and memberships, and then parachuting people in. You must never ever give up your membership roll book, right? That belongs to the church. The SNU says in its constitution that it belongs to them. It doesn't, right? It belongs to the church. You can give them a copy of it if you like, okay? But they only want it because it's a legal widget. It shows, that they have some control, and also it's got everyone's name and address on it, and it also says in the rules that unless you sign that, then you're not a full member, and in law that is the case. So you need to keep the true copy. You give them a true copy, and when you do give them the copy, you say that it's a true copy, and you keep the original yourself. So because they removed the right to disaffiliate, right, you think, oh well, we're stuffed now. But in the Waterloo case, the Charity Commission, who backed me as second defendant against the SNU, right, even though I'm not the charity, the SNU is the charity, that tells you something, doesn't it? The Charity Commission wanted to know how they were citing the Charity Commission themselves as being the reason for removing the right to disaffiliate. In other words, they were busted. It was just a big scam. I don't know if you remember at the time, they sent out these leaflets saying because the Charity Commission's changed certain rules on trust property and so forth, we must remove the right to disaffiliate because otherwise we'll lose our charitable status. Now, the church doesn't actually need charitable status. In a way, it's a charity in its own right. It's exempt from community charge, and if the union, you simply use the union's charity numbers by way of, shall we say, I don't know, well, why do you use them? I mean, I was going to say by way of perk or whatever, but I never ever found an advantage in using them anyway. So, I'm completely against this thing about charities anyway. And the Charity Commission, don't ever expect them to help you, even though they joined me as second defendant. I didn't ask them to, and they were useless. But it was interesting to sit and watch the secondary wolves, Mr. Halliwell from the Treasury Solicitor's Office being sent up from London to come and look at this case. That was only so the Charity Commission could cover their back, because if it had won, it would have set a legal precedent. So they had to have a presence there, and they saw that the union is not the true purchasers and owners of the land, property and assets, so they had no other option than to join me as second defendant anyway. Now, the union didn't even ask the Charity Commission for permission to take me to court as a charity. That's what they've got to do. And it was only me informing the Charity Commission that this hadn't happened. So there you have further arrogance. So let's get back to simplifying it. You own the place, it's yours, it's your car, it's your church if you like, right? You own it outright. So what you do is you simply go back to the old resolution where, and this is you being kind of course, you write to the SNU and in whatever way you want to, you outline why you don't want to be part of their swinging organisation anymore, right? And you give them the requisite time, as I would just simply follow the original model, not the one that was removed in 2002. Not that one, sorry, 2001, active into the year of 2002. I think it was passed in 2002, I'm sure it was 2001, but it could be wrong. Either way, who cares, right? The fact is, where we sit today, it's gone. Bada bing, right? So forget that. Go back to the one, you'd have to go back a few years before that, probably 1999 and previous to that, where the rules show you how to disaffiliate from the SNU, because the one after that says that you have to do the whole thing again a year later. Now that gives the union time to, you know, parachute in their little Nazis with the Stasi badges and exercise their control and reinforce the regime, a bit like NATO and all that, bombing Syria and Iraq and Iran and that, you know. It's what they try to do to destabilise that which is a sovereign organisation, which is your church of course, and which no one has a right to interfere with. So you forget that, you don't need to do it. So when we were at trial, throughout the trial, the first one was the magistrates' court. The union was granted an interim injunction for a month against me, and I acquiesced to it, you know, because I thought, well, let's see them run it for a month, because I wanted to show the membership how bad they were. And at the end of the month, people couldn't do enough. Now the thing was, at the end of the month, the union couldn't prove that they owned the church, because the judge granted them an interim injunction, not satisfied that they owned it or they had exclusive right of possession or to conduct services and activities there. But he granted them an interim injunction for 4 weeks. And when we came back a month later, they still couldn't prove it. And the fact they can't prove it is because they don't own your church. So it was overturned. But because it was a complex matter, a multi-track case, and the Charity Commission were wanting to get involved, the judge sent it to trial to the High Court Division of the Chancery Division, the High Court. And the trial date was set. Now the trial was scuppered many times by the SNU, and that's the subject of another story, because they tried all kinds of things. They were intercepting my mail, they were opening things, they were writing to the Legal Aid Board saying that you know, I hadn't declared all my income, that I was serving churches, and they gave the dates in which I was serving these places, and saying, you know, he gets money for this, when the reality is I'm only ever paid expenses anyway. I never take a fee unless it's the church's policy to give a fee and they insist on it, and usually I'll donate it back. So that was an idea, but it was all these little things, and that I'm using the premises for work and office work and stuff like that. Now this is all just part of and in the end, after the third time, the legal aid people, I spoke to them personally on the phone. They said, look, we're ignoring the SNU, don't worry, you're legally aided. And that's what really stuck in the craw of the SNU. But they didn't know, they still thought, because they'd intercepted mail, that I wasn't legally aided, because the last one they intercepted before I sorted and secured the mailbox was the one which said that I'd lost all my legal aid entitlements. So they knew that they would win the case, but they didn't know that I got it reinstated. Now when we went to the High Court, the judge and the barristers and the Charity Commission as well all said that the removal of the right to disaffiliate is a ridiculous rule, and it requires a simple challenge in court, that's all. So basically they can have whatever legislation they want in their union. Imagine me and you, we've set up our own little cabal organisation of swinging parasitic, you know, leeching bloodsuckers, right? And what we do is we decide to leech off everyone. So We pass legislation saying that everyone has to give us the shirt off their back. Well, they have to do it because that's what they've signed up to. But then when you challenge in a court and you say, what gives you the right to take the shirt off the back? Then the judge has to say, yes, well, what does give you the right? You see, and that's where the law is on it. No one's challenged it, in other words. So they can have whatever legislation they want. They can say whatever they like. So ignore that, right? It's got no teeth in it. It's a toothless tiger, right? It'll give you a nasty suck, like the blood-sucking leeches that they are. So what you do is you simply ignore all that, forget all that, right? You just draw up your resolution with your requisition, all your signatures of your members, your full members paid up. Explain why you don't want to be in the union. You don't even have to do that. Just say, you know, we wish to disaffiliate. We're passing this at the AGM, or you can call an extraordinary general meeting as per the old rules. Have your meeting, spell out terms, get everyone to sign it, and what you do is you send a copy of it to the union. So you follow that, you give notice of the special resolution, and then when it's signed by all the members, right, is that you get the members to sign a copy for the union and a copy for you. So there's two proper signatures on two separate versions of it. So you send that registered. It's got to be registered mail. Do not send it any other way, because there is a massive legal power in registered mail, right? It's not just a case of paying the money, right? In law, right, you're down there, right, without your registered mail. With your registered mail, you're in the heavens, right, in terms of your legality, right? It has unprecedented power. So registered, and you keep that copy there of your copy. You have your meeting. The SNU will then want to come along, out of a courtesy, you know, you can invite them, but you let them come on your terms, that they can come. They'll want to speak. Can they speak? That's entirely up to you. You allow not more than 3 people to come and only one of them to speak. They are not to engage in any mischief. They are not to misrepresent, and they are not to antagonize, intimidate, threaten, or cause to perish the church in any way. They are not to remove anything. You know, you simply say that they are to act at all times with honor and integrity and no mischief. Otherwise, that will impugn their right of attendance. So you spell out the terms on which they can come to your church. So you allow, this is all in the requisition, right? It's the sub-clauses, the extra bits. So you've got that in there, so you can expulse them. And if any, you know, and call the police if you have to, if they don't want to go. Threaten them with the law, because if it's your property and if they won't go, you have a right to remove them. You can physically remove them yourself, or you can get the law to do it. Okay, that's law of the land. That's the way it is. That's your common law in place, which is where the real power is. So then you pass your resolution. It's all voted on and everything else. Now the union probably won't even send anyone, because they'll say, well, we've removed the right to disaffiliate. Now if it isn't in there, what is it to say that you can't do it? Like, is there a piece of legislation that says you can't sell oranges on a Sunday in church? You know, if it isn't there, it isn't there. There's nothing to say that you can't do it. They've shot themselves in the foot. They've removed the right to disaffiliate, so you can disaffiliate anyway. It doesn't say in the rules that you cannot disaffiliate. But even if it did, it's still null and void, because as the High Court judge said, as the magistrate said himself in the initial hearings, and he was a very clever man. He wasn't one of these thicko, you know, administrative corporatized judges that you get. He was a proper serving, long-term member of the bar. You could see the man knew his stuff. Very clever man, right? They simply said, together with the barristers, together with the Charity Commission, this is a ridiculous rule, a ridiculous rule. Right, so you pass this legislation. There it is, there's your requisition, it's all signed, and that's it. But what you also need to put in there is that you will charge the union, right? You give them 2 weeks. Well, let's give them 4 weeks, right, to return the deeds. That's what you want, is the deeds to be returned. If not, right, you give them 4 weeks. after which you're going to charge them, you issue them with a scale of charges, right? Probably £125 a day, a reasonable charge for each day that they keep your deeds, you know, at least £100 a day. And you send it recorded delivery. It's an affidavit of truth that, you know, you've removed them. You've now in this letter, it's a fee scale activated. It says notice to charge, do not ignore this notice, similar to what you would get with a bailiff notice. Hold on. Right, here's one that I issued. Right, I'm going to have to cover this up because I don't want you to see who it's for. Now you issue them a notice to charge, and then underneath that, so I'll give you a quick flash, it says the next bit is you put the address of the union and the department along the top there, okay, whoever it is, okay. And this next bit here is, it says, you know, now what you can charge them with is if they hassle you, like for this one, for each postal and hand delivered letter, email received, blah blah, and the SNU or its agents, a charge will be levied of £175, right? Because you don't work for free. This is taking up your time, and as a you know, in a way, without going into detail, your church is a corporation in itself and has a right to charge. It's a business. It is a business, right? You have a right to charge. So that prevents any hassle, emails, stuff like that. For each telephone message, text message received, there'll be a charge of £125 because again, you have to deal with it, you know, to you or any committee. This actually isn't to the SNU. I'm just changing this here, right? And for each and any doorstep visit, which could be changed to, you know, them coming and trying to change the locks and everything else, to the name private property, because it is a private property. You need to say this church is a private property, and they'd be trespassing by the SNU or its agents, right? There'll be a charge of £250. If they interfere with the locks, you could probably charge them £500. I'd say I'd go for 900 because locksmiths are very expensive. They'll remove the original locks and you'll have to replace them. That's fair in law because you're going to take them to court, you see. You're going to issue legal proceedings. You know, the removal of any property or interference or any way interfering with, you know, the running of the church, you know, you'll have to write to me, or, you know, if you go on to like the Freeman sites, people like that, Sovereign Independence and the People's Constitution Group or whatever it is, you'll get templates and you can just adapt them to the union. Now these actually work, and then you put the name and address, and then you give an affidavit of truth saying, you know, there is no further contract in existence between you and the SNU because you've passed your resolution, right? You are the true purchasers and owners of the land, property and assets, and the SNU, there is no contract between you and the SNU whatsoever, something like that, you know, continuous or otherwise, consenting or carrying any authorising signatures. I'm just looking at this, see if this would apply. And then you want, so you then say, you know, that you want your deeds back and the fee scale's activated, right? And you want a kind of proof, required proof of claim that, you know, you'd be happy to settle anything with them if they could show there was any further obligation lawfully that you might have to them. As soon as they receive the validation of you receive the validation of that, the verification of their claim against you, whatever that is, a sworn affidavit that's got to be signed. And if there's any money, then they need to show in accordance with the Bill of Exchange Act 1882 that you owe them money. And that there's something signed on both parties. Also, they'll try and seize the bank account and the utilities, and you put all that in to your, I would put it in the requisition if you can, right? Put it in the requisition, because then that will stop them tampering, because that's what they did at Waterloo. They stopped the gas, the electricity, the water, the telephone. They stopped the bank account. They got all these things. Now they can't seize these things, but what they do is they lay claim to them and they write to the apposite authorities concerned. Now, for instance, with the bank account, the policy of any high street bank is to freeze an account where there is a dispute. So they create a dispute, so it's frozen. You give them the notice period, you know, perhaps a month, because it's deeds. Normally it'd be 14 days. You said failure to provide any of the aforementioned documentation within the said period invalidates the debtor, or whatever it is, you know, will be taken to constitute your agreement by acquiescence to the following terms, that you know, that you're going to pay all this money to us. I won't go into all this, it's only a short thing. And then you, accordingly, the minimum the SNU must do in order to carry out a lawful and honourable dialogue with our church in this matter is to reply appropriately within, you know, the 40-day period. Should some such reply not be received within this time, you may, as a courtesy, if you don't hear anything, then the fee scale's then activated. And notice to agent is notice to principal. Faithfully in honour, with respect and without prejudice, the true owner, occupier and purchaser of the land, assets and property of the above named address, no assured value, no liability, all rights reserved. Make sure you get that in, and then you can take that to court. Let it get up to a grand or two, bearing in mind small claims court is around, again, I'm not solid on this, but around £5,000. The magistrates' courts, I know in Ireland, go up to about £35,000. So you can issue court proceedings and simply go along and say, Your Honour, you know, I wish this, you know, this case to be heard. This is what we've done, and get a judgment then. Okay. I know it's a bit scatty, it's a bit thumbnaily and everything else, but essentially I hope you get the spirit of what I'm saying there, that you actually don't have to follow their crap anymore, because if you don't, right, then they've already won, right? And your church may be worth a lot of money, but either way, what it's worth to the members and the people and the generations that are still to come and those who've gone before, you can't put a price on. Waterloo Church was set up in 1937 on the 7th of July 1937, the 3 sevens, and it was closed in 2004, right? And they closed it immediately 2 years after, right? And they sold it off. They didn't pay a thing for it, and they got well over £250,000 for it. And we're without a church. We haven't got anything. And we had 76 fully paid up members. It was a functioning, real sort of jewel in the crown of the Merseyside spiritualist churches. And you look at what's left, you know, it was set up in difference to the awful churches that surround our church, you know. So it doesn't matter how good your membership is, it doesn't matter how squeakily clean you run it and how brilliant everyone thinks it is. If you are associated, affiliated or whatever with this maggot organisation run by crooks, thieves and criminals such as Charles Coulston, the NEC, the likes of that Gascoigne and Seaman and all those people, right, the NEC and the other, you know, basically what you're looking at in Stansted is a moose lodge, right? There's a covenant in the deeds that it's one of the main lodges. I think it might actually be the main lodge in Essex, but it's a serious lodge within Essex, and it'll always be a Masonic lodge. And when you look at the pattern and the way they roll it out, you're dealing with a cabal, You're dealing with a secret organisation that is based on corruption, usurpation and conquest. They've never bought anything, they've never paid for anything, and they give out these loans and they take your money and they play the stock exchange. It's called surplus funds. You need to look at your trust property deeds, you need to look at the trust property stuff they sent out and look at their portfolio of investments. I exposed them 12 years ago. 12 years ago they had 40 something thousand pounds of your money invested in the likes of Exxon, Esso, the second biggest arms manufacturer at the time in the world, British Aerospace, I think that certainly one of the biggest mining giants in the world, the Anglo-Australian owned Rio Tinto, you know, 30,000–40,000 pounds of your money a pop invested in these terrible companies. And these companies that are involved in animal testing like SmithKline, Glaxo, Wellcome, Beecham Foundation, you look at where your money's going. You're a spiritualist. They're taking part in secret police. These are propping up third world corrupt regimes. They're destroying the environment, animal testing, they're killing people, they're killing animals. You know, where do you want to go with it? And they're taking, I mean, the minimum was $250,000 a year of your money, and they're playing the stock exchange. I think it was £255,000, and then again it might have been more than that. It was at least that 12 years ago that they were investing in these portfolios. Now I put it to the union, right, and this is why they set up the ethics committee, which has kind of gone missing now, because people kicked off at the time. We need to kick off again, because that's not what spiritualism is about. So they set up this ethics committee which didn't do anything, allegedly to look at the ethical investments, supposedly, right, or the ethical practices. But as I put to them, you know, if Oxfam, the Quakers and the Cooperative Bank and so forth, you know, can invest ethically, why can't the SNU? You know, it's a maggot organisation. What happens is that when they play the stock exchange with your money, they get to keep the profits. They get to keep them, not you. You don't see them. And if they lose, guess who loses? That's right, you. It's a monopoly game. The house always wins, the bank always wins, right? And you little players there, you know, given so many chips to play with, you know, you lose, and you lose your property. The SNU doesn't need your church. It's got 400 something churches in affiliation already, and centres, and you know, probably 300 out of that number have their deeds put in trust with the SNU. Now the interesting thing is, the SNU holds the deeds, and they're not supposed to. Right, during the Waterloo trial, I have all letters to substantiate all this stuff, because it was a High Court trial. I got copies of all the letters, right. Got all the copies of everything. The Charity Commission ordered them to hand the deeds over to the SNU Trust, because the SNU Trust, although an adjacent office, and allegedly a separate organisation, was set up to hold the deeds on beneficial trust for the members. But the SNU Trust doesn't have the deeds, the SNU does. And why the SNU is trying to keep hold of the deeds is because, I don't know if you'd known this, for many years now, for the last 15 years, or certainly since 1995, they've been trying to court a high street bank like RBS, HSBC, Cooperative Bank and so forth, to take on the deeds. And they were going to put up your deeds, all these church deeds, as collateral for huge loans. So that's why the SNU won't give them up. They're supposed to, but they won't give them up. And you see, that tells you what a criminal, corrupt, insider dealing organisation that it is, run by criminals and thieves and crooks. Like, the main one is Charles Coulson. He's the big, he's the main Alibaba, right? And he's still in that job, and he'll be in it until he dies. He's a leech and a parasite, and he comes across very nice on the phone and everything with his kind of homely, lispy voice and everything else, but underneath, he doesn't care. The man is soulless, and to be on the NEC and to run those committees and those management committees and the district councils the way they do and everything else, right? You have to be a drone and a robot. There has to be something fundamentally wrong with you from a spiritual point of view in order for you to lack the imagination to see the hurt, the harm and the damage and the sheer criminality that you are causing and that you are creating right in front of you. For you to lack that, you've got to be sociopathic, you've got to be a drone and a robot. So they're not people you can engage with. They'll smile, and because they're sociopathic, they know what they should say. They know they should smile and be kind to you at a certain point, but when it comes down to it, they really don't care. They forget all about that. There's no loyalty, and it doesn't matter how many letters you write. It doesn't matter. Don't write letters. Do what I did. Pass your own resolution in good time, so it will stand up in court with all the members signed. You don't want to be it. You don't give our deeds back, right? Here's a fee scale activated, wherever it's gone. Fee scale activated, and take that to the court and get a judgment made, and then get the bailiff sent into them, right? And put in it that they cannot interfere with your property, right? Because they'll come. They tried to get me arrested for stealing stuff out of the church when all the furniture was already there in the church in front of them, and the police then went and interviewed them. They were removed from our church 3 times, right? They tried to show all this documentation to the police, and each time the police looked at their forms and said, you have showed us nothing out. And it was great, and I wished I could have filmed it. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I hope in some way I've inspired you into a deeper thinking. It's not complete, but you know, let's see how we get on. I'm going to upload the stuff eventually. It was on there originally. It's not been taken down because of the SNU or anything like that. But you know, let's get this organisation. You know, if you want to stay in the SNU, that's up to you, right? But there's a lot of people who don't, and you guess what? Here's the good news, right? You don't have to.